bound to be a really interesting seminar tonight. So my name's Lynette Russell. I'm currently on the unceded lands of Naarm, also known as Melbourne, the land of the Kulin Nations. And tonight we have a treat. We've got Dr. Horst Liebner, who's coming to us from Makassar, where I imagine it's a little warmer than it is here in Melbourne today. Horst is an independent scholar who's been associated with the Indonesian Coordination Ministry for Maritime Affairs, and he studies maritime traditions and the history of Southeast Asia. He received a PhD from the University of Leeds, and he focused on the 10th century, I'm not even going to attempt to say it, wreck. He's currently involved in documenting the Sulawesi boat building traditions, and in 2017 inscribed in the UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. He also maintains a website for this very purpose, which I highly recommend you have a look at. It's excellent. In 2019 and 2020, he organised the building of the 2 replicas of the 19th century Makassar trading vessels for both exhibitions and expeditions. You will have seen some of these. There have been a couple of little films made, documentaries, quite a bit of interest in them around on the internet. So have a look if you can get a chance to look at them. It's an absolute pleasure that Horst is going to speak to us tonight. I'm rather hoping that we might have someone else who's going to join us for a couple of questions at the end, who was also actively involved in the process, but I can't see them just at the moment. So for the moment, I'll just hand over to Horst.
Yeah, Lynette, thanks a lot. And without much ado, I best directly start sharing the screen. Yes, water. What I am going to tell you is about water and about the construction of a ship and sailing it to Australia. And you will see in a moment why it has to do with what you do, Global Encounters. This is our ship passing by, which would actually have been the opening, had it all be running well. And it's about Trepang Fishery. I don't know whether you know what Trepang is, but you'll have to learn in a moment. And it was called, it has to do with this year. What happened in Eastern Australia in 1770? Cook landed. And actually there should have been a major show about it last year, but as we all know, there was someone coming in between. So it didn't happen. Yet our program happened. It was called before 1770. I hope Sheikh Besam, after this presentation, will tell us why they called it before 1717. And it should be talking about things that actually happened in Northern Australia before Cook came. Here, for example, are rock paintings of non-European ships on Porter Island and Arnhem Land, which partly appear to be older than Cook's first landing in Eastern Australia. Here's a European version of these ships, seen by a expedition into Northern Australia in 1803, about the first time when the English actually had some ideas about looking at what was there in the northern part of Down Under. It isn't overly difficult to find where the ships came from. Here's a photo from the early 19th century, and you see they're nearly more or less the same, and it's called a local prau in Makassar. It actually is a Makassar ship. And there was a reason why the Makassaris came. In the early 18th century, the Dutch allowed landing of an annual first one and then more Chinese ships in the port of Makassar. And Chinese like Trepang, sea cucumber, while the Makassaris knew about a place where they could get it, Northern Australian waters. Makassar, Australia, before 1717. There is a local tradition about Makassar fleet, which was beaten by a Dutch armada off Buton in 1667. And the beaten ships, well, some of them ran down south as far as they could and arrived at a big island where they found an awful lot of trepang. Coming back to Makassar, they spread the story. Trepang sea cucumber, what I said, yeah, that's it. That's how it looks like when it's still alive. And this is how it looks like when it becomes a delicacy in China. It is rather expensive. Depending on the kind of trepang you have, in Hong Kong or Guangzhou, you pay between $30 and nearly $400 for a kilo of that stuff, which is quite some money for be it an Aboriginal woman or a Bajau in South Sulawesi. And we shouldn't be surprised that they all know the different kinds of trepang there are, because several of the types do command much higher prices than other ones. I'm not going to comment on this one comment. It probably has to do with the shape and color of these things. In the 18th century, trepang was the major export on the Chinese ships coming into Makassar port. And you see, just in these 7 voyages, the Chinese took away more than 1,700 metric tons of dried trepang. In the early 19th century, we hear from the harbor master of Makassar that the best trepang is called the Trepang Marege, the Australian one. It is the one most sought after in China, and it's the one commanding the highest prices. Actually, there is not much of a difference between Marege trepang, or Northern Australian one, and Eastern Indonesian one, because it's on the same shelf. And very probably the species of trepang around are more or less the same. There, however, would be another reason. Already in the 18th century, with exporting thousands of tons of trepang, the Macassans very probably had depleted their sources close by to Makassar. You can see that rather clearly in Dutch statistics from 1825 to mid-19th century here. 1825, just after the Napoleonic Wars, where world economy started stepping up again. If we take only the numbers of Sulawesi, you see the trend really goes into nadir. Yes, happily they knew about that untapped source in Northern Australian waters. In the first half of the 19th century, which is about the heyday of the industry, yearly probably up to 60 ships carrying very probably more than 1,000 people aboard were calling at Northern Australian coasts. And they divided them into the western part, Kayu Java, which was not so much visited, and Marege. Marege, today's Arnhem Land, was a place where they had the best connection to the local population. In Kayu Java, there is a number of small fortifications found by archaeologists, which seem to denote that there was probably struggle between the Aborigines and the Macassans. In Marege, we don't have that, and the local people fondly remember the Macassan coming. They did not only collect trepang, but we know from records taken by Australian administrators that they collected, for example, pearls, nacre, tortoiseshell, and a lot of other produce, and they did that rather opportunistically. Here is the story of a famous yacht, the Red Gauntlet, which stranded end of the 19th century near Darwin. And as our reporter tells us, the wreck soon disappeared. Everything was taken to Makassar and Makassar prowse. The Malays proved excellent scavengers. What's that about our Macassan sailors and in modern times and Northern Australia? Some of you might know that for the bicentenary of Australia in 1987-89, already such a ship was built and sailed to Arnhem Land, and it is now in the Northern Territories Museum and Art Gallery. And as Jeanette already mentioned, we built such a vessel in 2017 for an exhibition in Belgium. Who could still build such ships? Here, this man, for example, the late Hati Jafar. He was the man who had built Hati Marege, which is now in the Northern Territory Museum. These people would be the descendants of those who had built boats at least since the 19th century. We have sources which mention that the people of Lemo Lemo are the ones who are building all the boats for South Sulawesi. Ship normally is owned by people and they have ideas about what they want. Our ship, as we will hear after this presentation, was planned to be used for popular documentary of a time of the 18th century. And so they expected that the vessel could actually look like an 18th century ship. That is, using lined sailcloth materials that at least would look like something 200 years old. And as it was the star of a film, it should have been sufficiently graceful and refined. And safe. There were visitors like here, the consul of Australia in Makassar, and we had other visitors who very probably were not accustomed to sailing vessels. So we had to think about what we can do so they are safe. In South Sulawesi, ships are built planks first. That is, they are not built around frames like Europeans do. To achieve a symmetrical shape of this plank shell, there are rather complicated building methods which prescribe the number and position of planks in the lower hull of the ship, onto which then a number of circle wash strakes would be added, which then form the kind of ship you want. You can see that on the ship for the exhibition in Belgium. The soft planks of Papanglama being built up, turning her into what I would call a Polari. Others might call it a Padewakan. It very much depends on the shape of the hull, how you want to judge it. The Padewakan should be a little bit more broad. The Polari would be a very finely shaped vessel, rather fast. Unfortunately, our only information about something of the 18th century, about ships of the 18th century, that's a little bit more detailed, comes from a Dutch travel report, and they're actually in a footnote written by someone else in the English translation of that report. And they're talking about a low foredeck, something that is very low and is awkward because waves can crush over it. What they mean very probably is this feature here on a drawing of the early 19th century. And we can find the same feature on models, photographs of both the 19th and the 20th century. This is called the salompong in the language of the boat builders. So we assumed that any larger ship of the 18th century would be built in more or less the same way, having a lower hull and upper works fetched by various portions. Here strakes, which then would form the kind of vessel you want to have. After we talked to the builders, we decided to use the building plan of Tatatalu, the so-called 3 times cut, the kind of blueprint for building that ship for the lower hull. Making a ship with a Tatatalu means you have to make a building plan. It's called the Panata. And actually making this Panata is the very opening of ordering a ship. Taken for this is the handspan of the future owner. And this creates a spiritual bond between her or him and the shipwright. In the case of this ship, it very possibly due to the rather pleasant and genteel disposition of her owner, spared us the services of a number of lawyers. It is more than only using this hand span to make a spiritual bond. There's a small ceremony, one says, or ritual, where this hand then is multiplied over the length of the bamboo, counting various fates of the ship. She could have a bad smell, she might get profitable, she might be sinking, dying on land, never be finished, or be taken by pirates. This then is counted through the length of the bamboo until the size which more or less fits into the size of the projected vessel. The bamboo is cut onto that length and then divided. That this will become the ship's building plan after it is divided into 7 units by making marks like this onto the bamboo, i.e. it would be for Tambugu and 3 Ruang, as they are called. These units then are in the shipyard transferred onto the keel. No, it should be, here it is. All over on the keel, there will be 10 Tambugu and 9 Ruang. Here's a close-up of that, Tambugu and Ruang, and these provide references for the placement of dowels, for the length of the planks, where the frames will be set, and various other things. It is a rather complicated system. It is not like you put some planks together and you get a ship. The idea behind it is to have the dowels in the system avoid various places where they could collide with one another, or with plank connections, or with the dowels holding the frames. Talking about that would use up another half an hour, I feel. So we just leave it by this. Happily, while the ship was built, there were some researchers in Tanabero, the place where she was built, from Japan, Italy, and from Jakarta. And for them, it was quite a chance to record what was done. Among others, they made a 3D photogrammetry recording, which ends up in a 3D model in a computer. This can be used, for example, to trace the plank pattern. As far as we could trace it until now, no, where do you come? It fits into what we know about the Tatatalu. We're still working on it, but we have something which has never been done before. There was no records yet of a ship as big as this having 12 plank frames in the lower hull. So the lower hull and the arrangement of planks and all that did not pose problems for the builders. The upper works, however, were very much discussed. No? For the builders, it was rather clear that the vessel should carry these kind of sails. They're called tanja, and one of the masts, at least, should have been a tripod. They wanted to have a central cabin and a kind of, a hatch, a big hatch, which is covered with a tent-like structure called a kurung. And there should have been this overhanging aft deck called ambeng, with 2 openings on the sides into a cabin, which is under the deck, from where you can operate the rudders. For the owners, the ship should have been presentable. And so, being offered a number of alternatives, they eventually favored these models from the early, from the first half of the 19th century. They look much better than what we know from later ships. And they fit onto drawings we have, which I've already shown you from the early 19th century. As well, into a description by a Dutch ethnographer in the mid-19th century, and surprisingly, with a drawing made by an Englishman in the opening of the entrance to the Persian Gulf, being named a pirate, a Malay pirate in the Persian Gulf. There, however, is a number of rather obvious differences to later ships. The most elaborate one probably is this stern cabin, which is not seen on the early 20s or late 19th century ships. Oh, sorry. The cabins are apparently set upon the hull and not included into the shear strakes, which are on top of it. You can see that rather clearly here on the ship we built, Noral Marege. And if you project that onto the building plan, you see that there is an empty space where the cabin sides would fit onto. Another thing rather strange for the boat builders and for us just the same, as we'll see in a moment, was the fact that the tillers of the rudders point into that cabin. This follows several reports we have out of the 18th century, the 19th century. And it's much different to what we know today, where the tillers are operated from the deck. No one had ever built something like that. So all the construction around it and even all the trials we made did not really result in something working really properly. Only after repeated adjustments was it possible to arrange the ideal steering position. That is, sitting on the aft deck with your feet in the steering hatch and steering the ship from there. When on the voyage, 3 of the 4 rudders we had broke, we had to cut down trees in Alor and make new rudders. Oh, sorry, that's something doubled. Yeah, here it goes. These, however, were not arranged as good as it could have been, and we couldn't steer the ship anymore from outside of the steering hatch. Another difference to later ships would be this kind of gallery looking out, coming out of the side of the vessel. These galleries appear to have been rather common on early 19th century vessels, but they're not shown on later photographs or models. However, having a close look at the drawings we have of this Malay ship in the Persian Gulf of the late 19th century, there they are still. And just the same, the rather elaborate stern cabin. The galleries on Noral Marege became a rather welcome storage space, for example, for the dinghies, which we carried. Something you can see on later models, just the same. Where's the later model? I have to click. Another feature found on the early models and the descriptions is this one, a kind of storage space in front of the foredeck. So probably, we used it for a cable storage. But it just the same became the crew's respite from excessive demands by their betters. For reenactment scenes, the ship carried a set of sail made from Lontar palm. The cloth had to be ordered in the northern part of South Sulawesi. It was quite some work to put them together, but already in the very first squall we had to face using those sails, they ripped off. Sails are not really for good time sailing all the way, and I tell you, this is just normal rolling up a sail. So we decided to, if we were not filming reenactment scenes, to use the white sails we have here lying on board. For any reenactment scene, we'd cover all of the modern gear you could see easily, and use for that spare sailcloths and mats and whatever we had, which would look like, yeah, 200 years ago. We also tried very hard to ban any modern crockery from the foredeck galley. This, however, did not always succeed, even if you look at here a rather traditional scene. Now, cooking on stuff like that might be fun for a day or two, but I assure you, it is not really fun if you have to do that on a daily basis on a ship at sea. For people who are still very much remembering that in their own households, they did not have gas stoves or whatever, like our crew. It was something like a better to be avoided step back into more troubled times. Modern times know something else too, bureaucracy. A major problem was registering the vessel. All the dimensions, planking, framing, whatever, very much exceeded national Indonesian requirements. And all those potentially unsafe features like the openings in the aft deck and the big hatch in the center were not asked about. What became a problem was, especially with Indonesian administrators, that we had no engineer on board ship, explaining that it was a sailing vessel, and so we had no engine and thus no engineer, did meet quite some unbelief and, yeah, threats of withholding licenses. In the end, we got everything because we equipped the ship with everything demanded by several rules, like here SOLAS 5, which is much more than Indonesian asked for. And we told them that SOLAS rules actually demand that, or say that if you have a ship below 500 gross tons and carrying only 11 crew and passengers, you don't have to follow all those rules. We though did. But this we were far above what Northern Territory asks in terms of regulations for recreational boating. You see it is, yeah, a torch, flares. They are not talking about a radio, actually. No member of the crew had navigated ships further than the island of Alor, and that already several years ago. So we could use traditional navigation in the sense of using knew about the area only until the island of Bonerate. But even for the voyage on, it felt a little funny. Using a chart was already antiquated, facing the fact that we had a GPS plotter with charts, and several of the crew on their cell phones carried navigational programs. Modern times demand that you have to cross borders, and the places to go in and out of the countries are defined. So we couldn't use the well-known route of Trepangers of the 19th century, but had to go first to Samlaki and then cross over to Darwin. From there on, because we had run out of time, the ship had to be towed for better part of the voyage to our final destination. While we were far above any applicable rules for Northern Australian recreational sailing, we were not so facing Australia's fears about biosecurity. The vessel had to be taken ashore and fumigated, which demanded us to take out her ballast, at least half of it, in order not to break the hull. It was a traditional ship, so we did that in rather traditional ways. Happily, on the land side, we could use some more modern appliances. We're talking here about something like 7 tons of stones being carried around by hand. The ship then could be taken out with a crane and taken ashore for the fumigation. We tried to explain to the officers that during the at least 300 years of continual contact with South Sulawesi, any beetle or whatever there might have been coming from Sulawesi to Australia should already be there. This was unfortunately not successful. And so even after fumigation was done, we were demanded to change the whole ballast. Darwin does not produce heavy stones, I understand. So we were told that quite some of the stones we had to unload, to reload into the ship again, actually had been imported from Bali. In the end, as we were on land, we could use some rather modern gear to get them at least close to the ship. In the end of the day, we had moved some 28 tons of stones by hand. From Darwin, Marege was towed for the last 500 miles to a final destination, Yirkala, a place quite far off, where the local people had arranged for quite a reception. The waves were too high, so we had to use a local motorboat to get ashore. But our sailors were received by the Aborigines in fair show. This descent group by descent group came with their flags and colors. Some staged mock battles. Others were rather devout. And some actually were friendly, very friendly, with their women dancing and their male reciting songs. So in the very end, the voyage actually became a real-time reminder of an era without borders and biosecurity, of wooden ships sailing without engines and the skills to build them and to sail them beyond the horizon. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Horst. That was fantastic, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I believe that we have another guest here. Now, I have not yet met, Sheikh Wessam Harkawi, a Sydney-based Islamic scholar who was actively involved in the process of obtaining the funding, the filming, and engaging with the Islamic community in Australia, in order to show them what their own heritage was in terms of a relationship with Australia, and particularly Aboriginal Australia. Wessam, are you here?
Yes, I am. I just need a minute. I just try technology.
Thank you. We've been having a few technical issues tonight, so it seems quite appropriate.
Just one moment. I'll just turn on my camera in a second. Hopefully you'll be able to see me. Okay.
There we
Right.
go. There you are. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to be here. Excellent presentation, Dr. Horst. And lovely to see some faces. Dr. Campbell McKnight, lovely to see you. It's a very good presentation. Well done. Excellent, excellent. So even some of those photos I haven't seen before. So Dr. Horst, we got to have a chat after.
So, Wissam, can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the Islamic community and this particular event? Because I'm certainly under the impression that it had real meaning for particularly some of the youth in your community.
Absolutely. So this was born out of the sense of belonging when it originally started. And it really was about a place in Australia. It was about being able to say that there's a part or story to Australia that I belong to and connect with. And we found that there was no greater story really than for the community to basically reconnect with the stories of old, especially the Indigenous people of Northeastern Arnhem Land. And hence why we called it before 1770. And one thing led to another, and before you knew it, we found ourselves in Indonesia, in Sulawesi, embarked on this ship, and so it was just, it morphed from one thing to another and led to an extraordinary journey. And so we did a part one, but this formed feature of part two, and the whole journey, the trip, Haji Jafar, being the last, our ship was the last to be built. So it means so much to the community. It's changed and shifted mindsets. It's created discussion. It's, featured across every major cinema in Australia. So it's quite phenomenal, the impact and reach and depth of meaning that it's had in the minds of many, many young and mature people.
Fantastic, fantastic. We've got a couple of comments and possibly even a couple of questions. The first one is a comment from Rebecca Mirams, and she's reminding us, which is an important thing for us to do, is that the Magnet, the Museum and Art Gallery of Northern Territory, holds a lot of the planning documents from the original Hattie Marege from 1988. And of course, that's also in the actual Hattie Marege is in the collection at Magnet. So it's all very interesting indeed. And someone has asked, I've lost it for the moment, but they're asking about the sort of timber, Horst, whether or not you could say something about the, forgive my pronunciation, Tattaluk technique. Is it timber intensive or timber effective? Does it require a lot of trees, and what sort of trees does it use?
Planks first building, that is putting the plank frame together, the plank shell together before you put in frames, uses up more timber than the European method. The European method actually came up by the early industrialization, where people could produce planks. So you cut a big tree into several planks, which you then could put around the ship, around the frames, being like my hands now, and then you can put the planks onto the frames. So you use actually less timber, but those ships need more framing. So I wonder in the overall count whether plank first or frame first building does use up more timber or not. This is something still to be researched. Does it require a lot of trees? Natalie asks. Yes, it does. What kind of trees? Yeah, it depends on what trees you get. The one like the most, or being used traditionally the most, is called Natnasa. It's a kind of Sulawesian teak. For the upper planks, you'd use real teak if you have. If not, you use whatever kind of timber you find which is strong enough. On Nur al-Marege, actually we used parts of an old mango tree, which had broken down. I wonder whether you saw that on the pictures, but if you had, you probably would have not realized. They're a little darker than the other planks we had used.
Thank you. Kelly Clayton has asked a question about traditional cargo capacity of the ships. Horst, your example was a 4-ton NRT, don't know what that means, out of 13-ton GRT. This is about 30%. Is this a usual target?
Depends on how big a ship is. You can build a bigger ship. We could have built a 25-meter ship, but then Sheikh Wesam would have had to come up with about 3 or 4 times the money. So we did what we could. The ship, as she was there, and depends on just the same. How do you want to measure a ship like that? You've seen on the 3D reconstruction from stem outside, stem outside. She measures 17.4 meters. For the traditional measurement, it was something like 15, a little more. We carried 14 tons of stones, and I would have said we should have taken 20 just for having a ballasted. So in the end, I imagine the ship could have carried some 50 tons as her cargo capacity until she really sits in the water and becomes dangerous. We cannot count these ships, traditionally built ships, with NRT, GRT, and so forth, I believe. Maybe Nick could. I see Nick Birmingham sitting there. Perhaps he has some ideas about that.
Nick, did you want to answer? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Oh,
thank
very
you.
Good. The concept of net registered tonnage and gross registered tonnage is very much misunderstood. It has nothing to do with weight. It was originally a kind of guess at how many tons, which were huge barrels, a ship could carry. It's now something to do with its internal volume, but for something like a Perahu Padawakan, it tells you nothing. There's no relationship between registered tonnage and cargo capacity. But I'd like to comment on the ballast. 14 tons of ballast sounds like 10 tons too much.
No, Nick, it was okay. I would have liked 2 or 3 tons more, I tell you.
Yeah, it depends what you... Nah, this is too technical, I'll drop.
We do have a couple of other questions here. Thank you, Nick. Richard, hi Richard, nice to see you again. Horst, I was lucky enough to visit Nur al Marege in Makassar, and he was shown that the sealing material turned out to be paper bark, which he thought only grew in Australia. This was used to seal between the planks. Where did you source paper bark in Indonesia?
It is sold here, it's called baru, and you can buy it in traditional markets for shipping, which we still have in Barotre here. It is from, I forgot the name of it.
Melaleuca.
It's what Nick says. It's the bark, the inner bark of a tree, which just the same grows in Australia. As I said, the flora and fauna of Eastern Indonesia and Australia are not too much different. If you're talking about Trepang, it's just the same. Many of the trees are just the same. So.
Thank you. Natalie Pearson's asking a question, Horst, about what extent the Dutch colonial presence was a consideration when thinking about the Trepang trade.
Yeah, to talk about that, actually 2 days ago, the Dutch did not very much mix up with production of Trepang or whatsoever. They made no monopoly on it. They allowed it to be transported off by Chinese vessels. They registered it, yes. I don't know whether they took a fee on it, pajak, whether there was something to be paid if you gave it out, but maybe Campbell McKnight would know.
I can see Campbell, he's in the center of my screen.
Yes, Campbell should know. But as far as far as I know, at least from looking at the Dutch manuscripts, the harbor records and so, they just note the number. So and so much was loaded onto, or was taken to Batavia and so forth. Very probably one reason is, as you've seen on the pictures, it is not really, what should I say, a very attractive animal, that thing. And secondly, catching it is just the same, not an overly attractive job. In, say, 18th, 19th century until the last decades of the 20th century, it would mean free diving, like you being in the water for a better part of the day, collecting that stuff. Yeah.
We've got a question from Bernard Zimmerman asking how much would such a ship cost in the 1770s, which is an interesting question. I'm not sure anyone knows the answer. I certainly do not.
No, I just assume I wouldn't know the answer, but in the end, I believe one could look that up in the Dutch records in some, but there is, I don't know, it is something like 12,000 pages on Makassar only, which are already scanned by the Dutch archives. So until you find that, that will take some time.
I do have a question for Sheikh Wassam, but I'm going to go to this question back to you, Horst, and I'll come back to this last one. From Paul Thomas. Hi, Paul. Could you tell us a little bit more about traditional navigation? Was there a move to maps during the time of the Trepang trade was active, and was there any attempt to copy Dutch maps?
I wonder how far it was necessary to copy Dutch maps. We know that there is, or at least found were 3 or 4 versions of a copy of what appears to be a Dutch map of the late 18th century. But sailing would be done mainly without maps. As I said, we could sail better part of the way until Bonerate without using maps.
Yep.
Because we knew it, we had been there, we had sailed along there several times. So we had some ideas where to go, we even remembered a place which I wanted to see again, or I remembered it, I told the guys, come on, let's go have a look at it, where we anchored for a night. And then in these modern times, you want to use traditional navigation, get stopped by your crew having cell phones with navigational programs on them. And that means you say, hey, come on, it might be like this or that. And they come along with their cell phone and show you, no, 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 no.
The question I've got for you, Sheikh Wassam, is from our own Lily. She's asking, we've also, several of us have seen bits of the film that you were making. Has the film been made? Is it finished?
Yeah.
And what's the next plan for both the prow and the film?
Excellent question. Thank you. Look, the film has finished. It requires one more shot. There's a few more scenes that we need to get in terms of the archaeology space. And so obviously with Corona, we can't travel. So we've been waiting quite some time before we make that journey. The other thing I'd say is that I just wanted to point out that the endeavor or the entire ship and the cost was enormous. And it was enormous for a number of reasons. Some of the reasons were, for example, our trip. Every time we went to Makassar, you took a whole crew, a film crew that had to capture this thing on camera. And then you had, and when the cast, or for example, when the crew members, when they came on board, you have to obviously cater for everything, all safety equipment, a support vessel, even through Australian waters that met them on the border, because we catered for that as well, where there was an Australian ship waiting for them to enter Australian borders, because we obviously wanted to make sure and we wanted to maximize safety. So we were involved at every single step and stage. And let me just say, Horst done a fantastic job, and it couldn't have been done without him. Put it that way. He managed the whole thing from start to finish. So, a fantastic job. I don't think I've said that enough to Horst, but a beautiful job indeed. Look, so far the film has cost over $1 million for a community project that's massive. It's huge. and it is at its end. And so we're not far, hopefully, from releasing that, but we need to wait until the COVID situation eases up, gives a somewhat relative norm before we can make, a big release into cinemas and so on and so forth. Because we so much investment, we don't just want to do it without without the big bang, as they say.
Indeed. COVID has put paid to many of our plans.
Absolutely.
The only certainty is uncertainty, I'm afraid.
Absolutely. Look, the last thing I might say, sorry, I know you're short for time, but the ship is currently at Darwin. It's docked at the moment, so it's out of the water. It's being cared for. I know Horst would love it again, so he can renovate the boat. We've been having some conversations. So just thank you to everybody involved. I know I saw the former ambassador, and I've seen some faces that I've seen here before. So everybody's played a fantastic role, phenomenal role. It was a beautiful team effort, and I really appreciate all the efforts involved.
Thank you. Got just a couple of little questions here, comments. Buddy, hi in Adelaide, has said that he visited Ban Hollanda, the Maritime Museum in Thailand in 2018, and learned that the Makassar people had lived there from the 17th century onwards. Do you think that they might have travelled there in a similar sort of boat?
Very probably so, that the Makassar and Malay people who had run off Makassar after they lost the war against the Dutch in 1669. Actually, two Makassar youngsters were taken by the French to France from Thailand. Mm-hmm. They were not only traveling to Thailand. As we have seen on one of the slides, we have this funny record of a boat looking like that in the entrance to the Persian Gulf in the end 19th century. I'd imagine they were on a rather routine basis, traveling to Manila, I believe probably to India before the Dutch really came. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I have to say, we don't know about the form of the 17th century ships.
Yes.
Because this kind of vessel, which normally is called a Padewakan, only shows up in the records in the early 18th century. The oldest one I found is 1720s or so, where the Dutch talk about a ship like that carrying letters to Jakarta.
Okay. Got a couple of comments from Campbell, just, excuse me, suggesting on the answer on navigation, some captains had small compasses but no maps, and Jean Amarel has written about navigation in modern times. And he also would like to reinforce Sheikh Wessam's compliments to Horst, extremely well deserved. And I have to say, there's been a whole lot of comments about hats off to you, Horst. What an amazing effort and fantastic achievement.
I should add on that it wasn't me alone. There was a crew. There was Sheikh Wessam. Without him, it never would have been possible. There was Richard Matthews, whom I see here, the consul of Australia at that time in Makassar, who helped us a lot. Yeah, it wasn't only me, it was a whole team behind it.
Fantastic. The last question is, someone's asking, is Trepang trade still strong with the major consumers? Well, it's not only still strong, it's also going on here in Australia, and in fact, not a million miles from Monash, where it takes place, it's processed in Springvale at the big marine seafoods market. But I think I can safely say that, yes, Trepang trade is still strong, both here in Australia and elsewhere. Just before we finish up, I should just go to my last slide, which I do need to, oops. Now I'm having technical issues, sorry. I shall share my screen quickly. There's it. In our next couple of seminars, we've got 3 more for the year. I think people would agree that these seminars have been, they're really special. I'm just enjoyed them very much. We've got a lot out of them. But the 3 that we've got left for the rest of the year, Wendy van Bloemboord from Flinders University is going to be talking about the earliest records of a substantial culture contact between Indigenous Australians and the VOC. And then Drew Pettifer, who's an artist and art critic, is going to talk about the wreck of the Zeewick and a project that he's been working on. And then we've got Greg Lehman talking about a Palawa encounter with the French chaloupe. Monday the 6th to Wednesday the 8th at staggered times, and check our website, you'll find out when these are. We've got a Global Encounters Symposium. It goes over those 3 days. It's about 3 hours each day, so we don't all get Zoom fatigue. But we've got an extraordinary list of people: Keith Camacho, Priscilla Wahi, Matthew Spriggs, Hilmar Farid, Sarah Ward, Tiffany Shalom, Sian Lavery, and Himanshu Prabha Ray. Just a few of the wonderful people that we've got who are going to be talking to us about global encounters. And we'll be looking at Pacific, Indian, and other oceans. So we're going to be specifically looking at oceans, Southeast Asia and the like. So I hope people can register for that. Keep an eye on our website, and we will be reminding anybody who's on our list. Just leaves me one last thing to say, and that I shall stop sharing. And that is thank you enormously to Horst Liebner. It's been an absolute thrill and completely fascinating. Thank you so much, Sheikh Wassam, for coming in such short notice, and really do appreciate it. It was really brilliant. So thank you very much, everybody, and good night, and hopefully I'll see you all next month at our next seminar.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Horst. All right, see you, Campbell. So, Matthew Richards.